So I'm Josh. I'm on the committee for helping find the best speakers for these events. So I hope you're happy so far. And I encourage you to nominate or encourage your CTO or VP of engineering or what have you to come along next year as well and present and talk about how awesome your team is. We're going to have a panel right now because we had a bunch of interesting ideas coming through the presentations that we thought may actually be better if it was a bit more collaborative. The lean coffee thing was one thing. We're going to do a panel as well. It can be a bit interactive if you want to shout out strong opinions than what's being heard. Hopefully the topics we've picked are contentious enough that there's significant disagreement between the people here and maybe in the audience. There's a few items, but I'll just give you a very quick top-level view of what we're going to talk about. Product engineering or product engineers. Is it a single thing? So you'll see some companies where it's a single thing, and in others, like we just saw, where there's definite split between those functions, which can include the idea as well as, do we need architects and should the CTO be a geek or not? So sort of that sort of framing of what are the skills you bring to bear in that sort of team. And then a technology versus sociology focus for CTOs. There may have been a pendulum swinging over the past few years, and the things that as a CTO you need to think about, or that are becoming more and more time consuming. And then a final one, hopefully, if we have time, is CTO dark patterns and some of the maybe more Machiavellian things you might have to do in an organisation, depending on where you are. All right, so panelists, introduce yourselves, grab a mic, maybe give a 1-minute intro. I think it's already on.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Johnson. I'm the CTO for RedEye Apps, which is a 7-year-old startup founded out of Brisbane. We do software as a service applications. So I've been in the CTO role for probably about 4 months, but a long history of software development, architect. I was an architect, so I might have an opinion on that one. But yeah, so looking forward to the discussion today.
Cool. Thank you. My name's Dave Coombes. I'm the CTO at Tyro. So we're a technology company that provides payments and banking services predominantly for small businesses. So we've been around since 2003. We got our full banking license in 2016, so we've been providing banking products since then, and before that we were a merchant acquirer. Again, I spent a long time with architect in my title. That wasn't necessarily what I was doing on any given engagement. I worked at the same place that Sarah and Josh did for quite some time, so I've seen both sides of that particular discussion. And I've been CTO at Tyro for 2.5 years. We have just under 200 people in the engineering function there, recently expanded out into China as well.
Hi, I'm Sarah Taraporewalla, and I, for the last 12 years, have been working at Thoughtworks. Lately, I've been working with CTOs or head of architects or people at that type of space, turning their division and their organisation around and looking at what they need to do to work for the next couple of years and how to structure their teams and to put the right technologies in place.
All right, let's just get straight into it. So do we need architects?
It depends.
Can we see what the audience thinks? Show of hands.
Show of hands for yes. And no. Interesting.
We take a vote at the end. Yeah. See if we chase anyone. See if we chase
I mean, I was the first architect ever hired by Thoughtworks. This was back when it was just very developer focused. Dave was probably not far behind that, so we expanded. But it was very interesting to come into a very autonomous, developer-led team as somebody with a broader background, a more strategic view. So I think we did at the time. I'm going to say yes.
Okay, so I believe that it depends. And it depends on the type of organisation and what you have to do. But regardless of whether you have a pointy-haired person called a head of architecture who lives in an ivory tower, or you have someone who's baked in within the teams, what you always have is an architecture capability. So we should worry less about whether we have a particular person filling the role called architect, but we should worry more so, do we have our architecture capability, and do we have enough thought about our architecture, where we're going, what our architecture operating model is, and what that means to our code, to actually productionize our code. So I've seen places that they can't afford someone who has the sole title of architect because there is a small company and they just don't have that many people. Whereas I've been also at places that have hundreds of developers that actually do need at least one architect to help govern and help drive the direction that they're going.
I mean, I don't want to make this a less contentious discussion than people are hoping. So I agree with everything Sarah says. I think it's very contextual of where you are at a point in time, the size you are, and also the challenges that you are being faced with at a point in time. And I spent a long time working as an architect and then in architecture teams and leading architecture teams. And the way I always described it is that really architecture and the role that the architect plays is about change. So if you were never going to add another feature or never going to onboard a new customer, I would fire the architects because you wouldn't need them. Because your current state is interesting, but it's not interesting enough to wrap a job around, I don't think. What is interesting is where you want to go. And I think the way that we approach architecture is, are we making informed decisions based on risk and based on where the business wants to go, with the capacity and the people and the skills that we have available to us, and making sure that those decisions are aligned across the team. So I think that completely aligns with what Sarah's saying around the capability. It just happens that when the way Tyro evolved, so Tyro started as a two-team organisation, and it was front office and back office, and the teams were actually even named after the people that ran them. So it was Team Matt and Team Jeff. So everyone knew the side that they were in. And you were either taking a credit card payment or you were settling a credit card payment. And there's a very nice temporal kind of separation between those two processes. And that worked really well. You don't need architects when you've got two teams, and you certainly don't need architects when there's not a large overlap between what those teams are doing. But Tyro went through like a very kind of aggressive growth period, and I don't want to say mistake, but in hindsight, the suboptimal decision that we made was we cookie cut it out. We said that worked for two teams, let's do that again and again. We ended up with 18 delivery teams, all built in that kind of pattern. But we don't have 18 distinct products. So these teams have to coordinate a lot more than you would when they were just single delivery teams. And I think the challenge we had, that we found that teams were either solving the same problem multiple times, making incorrect assumptions about what other teams were going to give to them or be expected of them, trying new technologies and then them being orphaned and no one to look after. So all of those things which really start to, as you grow, and your number of people grows and the number of services you run grows, the cost of making those mistakes just gets higher and higher the more people you have and the more services you're trying to build. So we introduced first of all, more like an architecture capability, so making sure what's it mean to put a service into production, what's the checklist we have in place, how do you make sure that the decisions you're making are sound and informed. And then it turned out there was a few people who were very skilled at that and they gravitated towards the role. So it was almost like some people almost self-selected to be into that position rather than us kind of deigning to give them the title. And that's actually working quite well at the moment. We may well change at some point down the track. It may be something that we move back more into the teams, but it was really driven from the context we were in at the time.
I think I'm going to agree as well, sort of. But I think the nature of architecture is changing a little these days. And as a CTO, I want someone in my team, it's all about me, I want someone in my team who I can hold accountable for the overall robustness and scalability of the product. And to me, that's where the architect really sits. And I think when you start looking at things like microservices and containerization and things like that, the technology that's around today that we use as standard changes the nature of the architect from being a more micro-level, hands-on person to a little bit more macro. So I do think teams need to have their own capability. They need to be able to deliver and build their own software the way they need to. But there needs to be an overarching, yes, you're fitting into the way I want the technology to look and the way the company needs the product to grow and our solutions to develop. So an individual that is the anointed architect versus an architecture function, I think, is an interesting question. But as a CTO, I do want, names of accountability, people that I can hold to account for particular, roles and responsibilities. So happy for lots of people to fill an architecture function. It's good professional growth, etc. But I still think I need a single point of accountability, or multiple, depending on the size. For me, just one would be great.
I want to put a pin in your architect and CTO play there for the next one. But another thing that I observed, so I was also the first architect at Atlassian, and back then there were people that were doing architecture in the Jira and Confluence teams in particular, but I came in to do a very specific thing, and the team that we had between Ted, myself, and Doug, the product manager, was a total upheaval of the way the business worked. So going from a downloaded product that people ran onto their desk to a SaaS offering affected everything in the business, but obviously driven out of technology. So it was such a fundamental shift in the way things needed to be done that there was this role needed to drive it and have that sort of recognition that this was a very different way of operating.
But going back to Dave's point, that there was a specific need because you were growing and you were changing your business.
100%.
If you're doing more of a BAU style development, you don't necessarily need a single point or a group of people to come up with what your architecture is. I've been talking about the difference between macro level architecture and micro level architecture. Macro level is talking about we are going to be an event driven system, we're going to have these capabilities which need to be fulfilled either as a small monolith or a whole bunch of microservices. We are going to be using this monitoring tool, and this is how we're going to harden our system. This is our security practice that we're going to be applying across these different components. Now, teams, you go think about those micro-level architecture. How do you want to structure the actual code base? How do you want to build out the thing that we need to build from a, I will worry about the macro level, the teams can help worry about the micro level. And the thing that helps drive towards a consistent view, though, is having your architectural values and principles and guidelines in place so everyone actually understands what we're working towards, as well as what the future, the end state, the target vision actually is.
Mm. All right, so the other subtopic under this was, should the CTO be a geek? As an architect and a CTO, I write code. I do that for many reasons, which we can get into later if we have time, but I do that. And you mentioned having an architect to be the person responsible for those things, whereas I think as the CTO I am, but with help. So yeah, so should the CTO be a geek or not?
You may have to define geek a bit more specifically there. If you just mean somebody spends X% of their day writing code or not, then that's, I think, very contextual, dependent on the size of your organization. I do think that ultimately as a CTO, and if you're an organization of any significant size, you are presumably a member of the executive team, you're presumably directly reporting to the CEO, and presumably the person that the CEO is going to ask about technology and about your opinions on those things. If you don't care enough about technology, then you probably shouldn't be in that role. If you just care because of the title or its status or you're a manager or it's a salary, then there's lots of other organizations where there's hierarchies where you can go and get those kind of labels. I think if you're a chief technology officer, ultimately the people that you are, whose pastoral care you're responsible for are technologists. And if you can't represent them at an organizational level, then you probably shouldn't be in that role. Now, the flip side of that is you then also have to have some level of business acumen to realize that technology is just part of what most companies do. So although I refer to us as a technology company, we are obviously a bank. We're licensed as a bank. We are under APRA regulation if I was to play fast and loose with what APRA say around things like security or outsourcing, I wouldn't be in the job for very long. So I think that balancing act between you're representing the technologists in your organisation to the wider part means you have to care about the technology, but that can't be the only thing you care about because your context is wider than probably anybody else in your group.
I think that's a really good point. So while my background is quite technical, right now I wouldn't say I fall into the geek category, but I make sure I'm surrounded by people who actually do fall into that. And I think that's one of the things as you become a leader and become a manager, some of your technical skills do naturally drop away. I'm always interested in technology, always have been, so that won't go away. And I agree with you definitely, Dave, on that. If you're the Chief Technology Officer, you have to have some level of interest in technology, otherwise what are you doing there? But I also think the business acumen starts to take over, and it depends on the organisation. So we're a software company, we sell our software solutions, so we don't make a product that we sell that the software underpins. The software is our product. So that then changes, I think, the nature of the role of the CTO somewhat. Can do. You can choose to be more commercial, or you can choose to be more product. So I guess I'm in the business because I can blend the two, but I am more probably on the commercial and make sure we're delivering, make sure we're meeting our SLAs, make sure that we're pricing the product, we're building product that will bring more revenue, that we're architecturally solid. So it depends on the size. But if you can't have a technical conversation with your peers who are other CTOs, then I think that's also important that you can hold those types of conversations and those interests. It's a bit of an each-way bet. I think you need to be both.
I've got a bias because I'm a technologist. I believe CTO should be first and foremost have a technical background and be able to speak, true to heart to that. But as they have gone through their career, they've picked up people skills and leadership skills and business skills so that they can have a well-rounded conversation. But if you look at the different types of CXs that sit at the table to make decisions for the business, they are the ones who represent how the technology will enable their business to succeed.
So who's a CTO or head of technology, hands up, who has learnt a new language in the last year of those people? Cool, good on you. But what about being able to have detailed conversations to help reach consensus? It's a credibility issue, I think, as well. But depending on the size of the team, there needs to be trust in the people. It sort of leads on to the next thing, which was my technology versus sociology. Is it a pendulum? You talked about well-rounded and a harmony between those. But I've contended that CTOs lately have been more interested in Myers-Briggs quackery than Curry-Howard correspondence, because there's all this talk about the operation of a team as opposed to the engineering process and the tools and everything we use to go about our job. But it is a social sport as well, right? Writing software. So, ideas, thoughts?
So I would say, although, what I said previously about, being a CTO, you have to care deeply about the technology, you've got to be able to represent what technologists want. I didn't actually train in computer science, I trained in physics, but I've forgotten pretty much everything I ever knew about physics. The one thing I do remember is that hot air rises, and nearly everything that comes to me is bad news. Like very, very, because that's just the nature of where you sit in the organisation. Like, things get escalated to you. This person hasn't done this other person hasn't done that, this thing's fallen over, this thing's late, this thing's cost too much. Very few of the things that come to me are like, should we use technology X or technology Y, or, tabs versus spaces. Like, it's spaces.
VI.
those decisions, quite rightly, are all being handled, at the levels that they should be. So the things that get escalated to me are nearly always around strategy, alignment, people engagement, sometimes damage limitation when things have kind of gone a bit awry. And a lot of that is about, we are dealing with, people with personalities and egos and thoughts and histories and aspirations. And so a lot of the stuff, the problems you have to deal with are fundamentally people problems. We are a bank and a payments company, so we're not on the bleeding edge of technology. We're not building, there's not a huge R&D component to what we do. So a lot of stuff is how do we use technology to enable our business where we want to go? And even more importantly, how do we get these great technologies that we got all aligned and building the things that the business wants? So 80% of my day is spent on people-related things, I would say. And that's on a good day.
I don't think I've heard of a problem that has been a true technology problem. I've heard of the problems where the actual problems fundamentally have been the people or the processes that are around it. I think that if we focus more on the people and the sociology side of things, and promote that, we might actually see a different makeup of this room. In the next couple of years, we might have more people looking like me in this room than someone looking like you.
Hope so. I'm retired, so definitely that will happen.
Definitely the sociology side of things is the biggest part of my day. And it's a challenge because I think as a CTO, you are in that role because you are interested in technology, and that is the stuff that, that gets us excited, the things we like to, the shiny new toys. But equally, you've got to create the space for your team to be able to develop their skills and learn new technology. So you do need to keep up. You can combine the two, I think, by understanding that the people who work for you, most of them, are technologists themselves. They do want to get more hands-on with good technology, and they do want to, they have their own little team things that go on. You'll deal with people at every level. They're dealing with people issues, and they've only come to you because they can't actually resolve the issues themselves. So while yes, you do need to be very much, I think, looking at that, how do you bring a team together, and it is about how do you blend technology with the team and give them the opportunity to be the best they can be at their roles. I mean, it sounds like a bit of a truism, but it is, unfortunately, we're more people-oriented, I think, these days than technology.
So at least three of us have worked for a company that has been well known for having a sense of social responsibility and directed ethical activities. One of us is at an organisation in an industry where that might be seen as a very rare thing. Sort of in that space, what's the CTO role in helping the company drive towards that? Your CFO is going to have a very different outlook, not obviously, but often than say the product people and people engineering the products. And when a question about ethics in technology comes up, the CTO may have a very different position to the CEO and the CFO. So any thoughts on that?
I can give you a very specific, concrete example that came up recently. There is a particular, I'm trying to think how I can say this while not being too explicit about it. So the federal government wants to introduce the cashless debit card. Very contentious subject. So the idea is people on welfare, do you want to give them the money, or do you want to give them a card that means that they have to, they can only use these things? And very rarely do I think organisations operate as a democracy, or people in leadership positions, I think, are actually paid often to make those decisions in informed ways. This was one particular issue that I knew a number of people in my team felt very strongly about, and it's one of the few times when we actually went out and canvassed the opinion of everybody in the engineering team about how they felt about that subject, and we provided some comms and some fairly impartial, I think, views on both sides of that particular argument as to whether this is a good idea or not, and then we put it out to a survey and we allowed people to give their opinion, whether they supported it, whether they didn't support it, whether they thought it should be a management decision or whether they were ambivalent. And I'm not going to share the results because that's not appropriate, but I think it was I think it's a CTO's job sometimes to just gauge the kind of litmus test of what's actually important for people in your teams, because a lot of people work for technology organizations because they like the tech, but I think even more people work for the company because they care about the purpose of the company, they care about the values. If you start to make decisions which are misaligned with those values, people can see that a mile off. So we actually, and I had full support of my boss to do that. And then that meant that whatever, would we have enough people to work on it if we needed to? Is it something that's very divisive and people felt strongly against? So I think that's one of the few occasions where we put that out to the whole company. Luckily, because of the nature, we don't have branches, we don't have advisors, we weren't subject to a lot of the challenges that banks in the Royal Commission had, so we have a very aligned leadership team. But I think sometimes, technologists have a certain view on certain things, and I think it's important that we have a view, we can represent the views of the people in our teams to the wider organisation.
I think ethics plays a huge part in the role of the developers and technologists. As more and more businesses are being enabled by technology, we have a stronger and stronger voice in what should and shouldn't be possible. I'll take an example of Apple's credit card. A man and a wife applied for a credit card. They came back with a man getting a very, very high credit limit and the wife getting a very, very low credit limit. They went back to Apple and the actual credit underwriter to say why, what is the difference? Because we are married, we've been married for a long time, we've both paid our bills, we essentially should have the same credit rating. The credit underwriter couldn't tell them why the wife had a lower credit rating. There is a machine learning algorithm that is putting all of the inputs in there and somehow working out that she has less right to the credit than the man. And we're seeing this more and more as, when we're moving into machine learning, the algorithms which are black box algorithms which we can't see, we can't understand, we don't understand what the decision was, we just know what the inputs are and what the outputs are. If we start programming these machine learning algorithms with a certain biased input, we're going to start moving our society in a one world view. So if we can't explain the ethics behind our systems, when the computers eventually take over, they'll be based on the people that program them, and there'll be the thoughts and the biases put in against them.
I think that's a really good point. And the robo-debt, everyone will have heard about robo-debt and the Centrelink things that's been going on. I think that's a similar situation without trying to get into whether it's the right or the wrong thing. We need to, as technologists, take some responsibility for the impact of what it is that we're building, the impact that it has on society, on the people at the receiving end of it, and how do we influence that as best we can so that we get a balanced view, or we put it back into the hands of the humans to do the work. I mean, a lot of what I focus on is how do I automate? How do I make that, without putting too fine a point on it, how do we make that person's role redundant so that they can focus on better things? But also because we want to automate, because there's not enough people to do the types of jobs that some of the things we coding for and building for actually need to do. So I think in all of that, there is definitely an ethical question around what are we doing, why are we doing it, and are we doing it for the right reasons, and what's the outcome and the impact of what it is we're building. And that can be in any industry. Like our software is used in asset-intensive industries. It's hardly likely to have some broad sweeping ethical impact, but at the end of the day, it absolutely could. So we need to just be aware of that and make sure that we understand it. So it's back to that more well-rounded view of being anyone in a CXO position needs to have the company as well as their actual job responsibilities best results, and society in general, I think, as an afterthought.
I suppose as an additional question is what do you do about it when you're faced with that decision? It's easy for some of us to make a decision to walk away and go somewhere else. But, I'm male, white, tall, can speak English, and I'm devastatingly good looking. So I can definitely go and work somewhere else. But there's a lot of people that are not in that position, and they may have to compromise their ethics to continue to be employed and earn a living for their family. So, as a CTO, do we have a responsibility to look after them as well and stand up for them?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And the way that we've approached that at Tara, we did a refresh of our company values about a year ago. And I think, company values can just become, I was going to say stuff you see in a mouse mat, but we don't even have mouse mats anymore. So, on a poster on a wall, and they become irrelevant. But if you pick a set of values or collapse on a set of values that everybody can buy into, then you can stress test those decisions against those. So then I think it's quite relatively easy to raise those things. I find with my boss or with my peers on the exec team, and genuinely say, is this decision in line with our values? Because if it isn't, we need to be able to go back to our people and say why we're making a decision which is misaligned. Now, at some point, my boss may overrule me, and he may say, we're going to go and do this and don't do that, and then I then have to make a decision about how I communicate that with my team. But I think the most important bit is that it's clear what our company stands for, it's clear what our purpose is, it's clear who we're there to support. Every decision we make should be demonstrably traceable to supporting those values, and when it isn't, we should be held to account as to why that isn't the case.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think the ethics question can be a big question and a small question. So it can be affecting the entire society, and it can be just doing the right thing by your customers. So ethics can, it's not just about, am I doing something for the greater good? It's, am I doing the right thing? So I come from that as I said, we're a software vendor. So it can be easy to take a shortcut to get a fix out the door, to get a new feature put in place, and just go, okay, that's good enough. But then the question is, are you doing the right thing by the customer, by everyone else downstream who has to support it, has to implement it, whatever else may need to be involved? So I think it's the decisions sound big, but they actually happen on a day-to-day basis as well. And having those company values and just that integrity there to start with makes it really easy to then say, no, this is what we stand for, therefore we will do it this way. It gives everybody that ability to push back on doing things that they don't want to do or that don't align with their values.
I think one thing is it's important to set up a safe forum for people to discuss this type of thing. So something that we have, we've got very strong, passionate people that work for Thoughtworks, especially that are very socially minded. We continually have questions about different industries and different specific companies. Do we want to do work for them? They've got this really cool technical problem. Do we want to do that technical problem, but they're over killing our rainforests, over in Borneo, or they are, they come as a company. What type of impact would we have into their organisation? What we have though is an open forum to have those conversations without repercussions. So being able to voice your opinion, be heard, we have that discussed. How do we want to have our company shaped? And then at least the decision is one that's been made openly. And if we decide to work for that company and you personally don't want to work for, you don't suffer any repercussions by saying, actually, this personal one, it goes against my personal values.
I do think as well, so one of our values is now wow the customer. And whenever we're kind of making decisions, particularly around things like, pricing or, ways that we're going to interact with them. One kind of thing is like, if the customers to hear the decisions or the conversation we're having now, would they say wow? And would they say wow in a good way? Or would they kind of go, wow, I never thought you'd do that, or I never thought that's the way you go about it? And I kind of think if the decisions you're making, even if, for commercial reasons you can't actually publish them, would you be embarrassed if the customers knew the kind of decisions you were making? Or would you be embarrassed to go home and tell your family about the sorts of decisions you're making on a day-to-day basis? And I think that's kind of often the time that I kind of think about it. Would I be proud or embarrassed about the kind of things or the way that we're operating? And I think I can safely say Tyro would be proud. I've worked at other organisations where that's not always been the case.
Nice. Now this one was raised by Simon Rake-Allen in Melbourne. He threw out CTO dark patterns. So this is in the case where, well, it's not always just that case, but often CTOs don't necessarily have direct reports. They might just be more in an influence and leading role, and there's somebody who manages engineering as opposed to maybe a more outwardly facing championing type role that some CTOs play. Nonetheless, whether that's the case or not, a CTO has to affect change in many ways. There's training, mentoring, giving talks, bringing in, using your network to bring in external speakers, provide architectural direction, maybe even frame OKRs or KPIs or things like that. And then Simon's suggesting that in some cases, whether for good or ill, that those mechanisms for change are open to manipulation because there's sometimes non-transparent objectives. And our table was talking about one of the reasons you would not want to go to another organisation or would leave one is the political machinations that go on. Furthermore, as a CTO, you might be very close to the CEO, and there is a lot of opacity in the discussions that go on there, and then you may be, the developers don't see any of that, and you may be pushing an agenda that is for you to get things done that isn't necessarily what they see. They don't understand why. So he was asking, is that a cynical view? Does it happen? Do you need to be like that sometimes? Especially maybe when you're entering into an organisation where there's a lot of back pressure and that you need to clear a path.
I'm going to say 100% you have to be like that sometimes. So, and it's really because it's not trying to be underhanded. It's really about how much time and how quickly can you bring everyone into the same level and depth of understanding. And part of the reason we hold the roles we have is because of the experience that we have in the industries that we've got it in, and the work that we've done. And I use this maybe as a bit of an excuse, but I can't unravel that 25 plus years of experience into a 5-minute conversation that's going to make sense to someone who's just started work. So how do you change it into something that's going to make sense for that person, for that team, for whoever it is that you need to do the communication with? And really, you may have, it's almost like having an external objective to the one that you're actually talking about. But providing it's, for the good of the business, you know what the CEO is asking of you and you understand how best to achieve that. And I think there are ways. It's called managing in actual fact, not dark patterns and things like that. I think any manager, anyone who's been a manager or is a manager, sometimes has to work things to get things done.
I would partly agree. I think as a CTO or in any leadership position, probably in any company, but particularly as a CTO, you kind of live or die by the relationships that you have often with your peers or with other members of the industry. And I think that the one thing that probably I represent technology, to the rest of the company. I represent technology to my boss. Most importantly, I represent technology to my other exec peers, and I probably spend as much time building consent with them as I do building consent in the engineering team. And in fact, when you're talking to your peers, all you really only have is influence. and the ability to try and get to define a shared goal or a shared outcome and get to that. So probably what the people in, say, the engineering team don't see is the time that I spend talking to our head of product or talking to our information security person or talking to marketing or talking to sales and really trying to empathize with the things that they have to do. And an awful lot of the time you just realize that you've got slightly misaligned goals, and by a realignment of what you need to do or by raising that misalignment, a lot of those issues can get, kind of carved out, because we're not a big company, we're not big warring fiefdoms and one wins and one loses. We're a single company with a single P&L, and we're all trying to move in the same direction. So I don't think any of that is dark patterns. I think it's, just with time and experience, and like it said before, just by making a lot of mistakes and doing a lot of things clumsily. If you do it wrong 100 times, eventually you'll probably get it right. And you have, and I've learned, I think, just to have more empathetic conversations with my peers. The other thing, and this is not a dark pattern, but I think it's probably the thing that supports me the most, is over time I've built a very supportive network of people outside my organization who are often in similar types of companies, but are maybe experiencing different things or have experienced them at different times. And it's often very contentious and heated to have a conversation inside your own organization about challenges you've got, because inevitably it involves the people who are involved. I find often if you can go and have a peer-level conversation with somebody outside, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a friend, whether it's a former colleague or whatever, you can often kind of talk about those things in a way that maybe it's hard to do internally, and really sort of stress test a few ideas, and then you can go back in, okay, I've really been able to give this idea some thought, or the approach I want to do with some thought, but without actually, potentially stepping on other people's toes, because it's very hard. It's easy to refactor code and to, undo changes. It's very hard to undo a change that you've made on a person, because you force their opinion about something, and then they kind of, oh no, we're not going to do that now, we're going to do something else. It's a bit harder to do undo or control Z on a human being, it turns out.
On that, I guess what I probably didn't say is that probably most of the time that you're doing that is not necessarily with your direct team, which is exactly what you said too, Dave. It's about the rest of the organisation and bringing them on board. Because I find the team in the technology, like my team directly, they get it. Like 90% of the time they get what we're trying to do because they understand the technology. It's more those individuals that don't have that same level of understanding that you really need to work at, build the relationships and get the message across.
That's good. I think there's some people in the organisation or even outside of the organisation that you can have completely frank and open conversations with, and be completely vulnerable in those situations, saying, I've got no idea what's going on, but this is my problem. But then you've got to put on a different persona when it comes to addressing your team, because what they don't want to see is uncertainty and just where they're going, because if people see the uncertainty in the leadership, then they themselves have that within themselves, and then that flows onto the actual product that they're working on as well.
So there was an organisation I joined as CTO, and there's a fairly toxic relationship between the engineers and the marketing team, which include designers and the product owners. So some might call this a dark pattern, but I would say it's probably a blindingly light pattern. But just harking on what you were saying, Dave, about your team don't necessarily get to see all the conversations you're having with your peers. I actively and verbally and very vociferously worked with the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer, and very visibly with both teams, so they could see us talking and hear what we were talking about, and hearing us coming to a consensus and agreeing, and then saying the same message back, so that was a way to get individuals in each of our teams to do the same thing and to empathise with each other. So that was maybe slightly psychological, but it seemed to work. I thought it was for a good reason. All right, we've got a bit of time left. Any questions like you want to shoot or contribute? No? You're all a bit tired? We've got an afternoon tea next. Oh, one over there. Sorry, two over there.
I don't know if that's a good question.
Okay, give us shit questions are good too.
And it's going to take this topic completely off.
Good.
So, something that I really struggle with is to measure the effect of the soft skills. So I really like technology, but I really love people. But the problem with this, in my experience so far, is that whenever I make changes to the way we operate, I don't know how to measure the effect of those changes effectively. So I just basically wanted to ask as a bit of a general, OKRs give you, if you can figure out what the objective is, you still have a real challenge figuring out how you determine what your key results are. So I guess the question then is, how do you go about figuring out or measuring the efficiencies of your teams and the effectiveness of the changes that you make?
On their output or their output?
Well, the two would be related, I would imagine. Well, that's the claim, right? So the claim is always, from a social perspective, and this is something that I always enjoyed about the agile work environment, is that in theory, you're making people's lives better by being more agile and open and inclusive, and that should give you the productivity benefit. So even if you're a sociopath, I should be able to sell you the soft leadership package if you don't give a shit about anybody, because it still makes sense from a business perspective. The problem I have, though, is that this makes logical sense to me, but I need data to support this to people who might not have the same ideas. And that's always, at least in my experience, again, going to meetups, attending conferences, that gets really rushed over. Like, oh, blah, 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 and then you measure this, and then you go on. But to measure this, there's a lot of nuances. I'm going to go around in circles now, but I just want to know, how do you measure the changes or the efficiencies of your teams, the outcomes?
I've recently just finished reading the Accelerate book with Jez Humble, Jing Kim, and Dr. Nicole Ferguson. And in it, they've been surveying, as part of the State of DevOps report that they put out every year. They survey a whole bunch of different companies. One of the metrics that they look at is what you could kind of call organizational happiness. So the happiness of the people, are people wanting to stay here, are people wanting to come. And that's actually one of the key indicators to whether the performance of a company. And then from that, they can look at these 4 key metrics to work out whether a company is going to be high performing, elite performing, medium performing, or low performing. And they all work as a system to drive that performance. So you could measure those 4 key areas, which is about getting stuff out the door really quickly versus getting stable stuff in production. So that's a measure that you could use as a lagging indicator.
I think one of the reasons you're implementing changes like that is to improve the productivity of the team. So it's not, wake up one morning, I'm going to change the way we work because I'm bored. It's very much around you're trying to achieve a specific outcome. So, and that's, like you said, it's not just about the output, because teams churning out code, features, bugs, whatever, if they have to be recycled and reworked, it's not really a good thing. So productivity and how you want to measure productivity is going to vary from organisation to organisation, because it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the work that you're doing. So definitely engagement, and that's an employee score that you can do, but actual hard measure, has the process that I've put in place actually improved from what it was? So you have to take a benchmark of whatever it is you're trying to improve to start with, and then measure it again at the end. So I think you can't measure something if all you're doing is measuring it at the end of the result. You have to have something you're measuring it against. So you need to know what was your productivity like, or what was it, how long did it take for a feature to get released, or how many bugs or defects did you raise on that to start with, versus after the process, what's the impact that you've made. I think too often we get asked to measure when we're halfway through implementing something and we go, well, I don't have a starting point. So it's really hard for me to tell you how much I've improved, because I don't know what it was to start with. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I think we all know it's notoriously hard to measure productivity in software engineering, not least because it's still a very nascent industry compared to other forms of engineering, but also because it's very hard to do a control experiment against yourself, because your team and your company is very contextual. I would also say that if people are having conversations with you about productivity, they're probably already unhappy. So no one has a productivity conversation when you're doing 30% year-on-year customer growth or you're knocking the lights out. No, people question productivity when they feel they're not getting what they should be doing. So I think that what we found is it's really around making sure you're optimizing on doing the things which are going to have the biggest impact for your customers and the business. So you don't have to build software quicker. You need to be building the most important stuff in the right order and getting that out. And often, certainly if you're in an organization where people feel very aligned to the purpose of that organization, by doing the things which impact the customers most, that already drives up engagement. So when I first started at Tyro, you kind of go through the conversations of how, what things you want to improve, and I try to improve a million things, and they all just get blown back in your face because they go, don't tell us the answer, which is the right thing to do if you're talking to a bunch of technologists. But listen to what are the 2 or 3 things that would make people's lives better, focus on that, and then making sure that you are optimizing for the things that the business cares about. And then we find we never talk about productivity or story points or any of that stuff. We talk about, are we meeting the goals that we want the company to do? We started doing the Culture Amp engagement surveys, and I think the engagement number is important, but I think people focus on this top-level engagement number a bit too much. It's a nice high-level metric, but I think it's a slightly derived number because it's like, do you see yourself here in 2 years' time? Do you think about looking for another job? I think there's a whole bunch of other really useful information in the other questions, which are really about, do you trust the leadership? Do you care about what the organisation is doing? Do you have the tools to make your job, to do your job day to day? Do you, are the processes working for you or against you? And I think, listening to the people and just finding out getting the impediments out of the way, I find takes care of the productivity things. We don't even try and measure that anymore.
So productivity is being used a lot, but it's not necessarily just a quantitative metric, right? It's if you know anything about B companies, anyone heard about a B company? Probably originated in an idea out of Harvard Business Review called strategy maps. So there's a couple of books on that. It's about things that are important to the company that aren't just bottom line, and like a whole shift away from just the hardcore financial or quantitative metrics that are very lagging to indicate people's happiness, I suppose. So that's one thing. Like, how is what we're doing matching those underlying objectives? For me, more leading indicators or more instantaneous indicators are things like, are people talking with each other on the floor? Or is it only in meetings or toxic emails? Are the developers sort of going home feeling a sense of accomplishment every day because they've been able to deliver value and see someone derive benefit from it? Is it a learning culture? Are they learning every day? Are they doing things like volunteering brown bags and sessions like that? And you can see this vibrancy of people exchanging ideas. Are they feeling safe to come up with some new innovation? And you're hearing product ideas coming from the development team, and they want to hear from the users. They want to work with the users. So all those sort of things are sort of more immediate. Things are healthy. Like there's good hygiene in the technical processes, but then the value system is healthy as well. The way people interact with each other. And a lot of the things that the others said as well are things you need to watch for regularly. So it's productivity in a Deming sense, not a Taylor sense, I suppose, is the way to look at it. There was another question.
So can I hark back to the architecture discussion? So we talked about having an architecture function, which you need, otherwise you just have ad hoc architecture, which is you can really formalise that in an architecture role, maybe an architecture team, but what's the bit in the middle where you don't have the architecture team? How do you organise yourself so you've got an organisational structure that gives you the architecture function without that formal role? Does that make sense?
I mean, I'll tell you exactly how we're structured, and you could decide whether that works for you. So we're kind of Spotify-esque. So we've got sort of tribes that loosely align. Well, they align with our payments and banking business and our digital channels. And we have a solution architect in each area, and they are a full-time member of that tribe. That's where they live and breathe. That's where all their work happens. They have they used to have a reporting line relationship to the engineering lead of that tribe. Since we do have a head of architecture now, but that's really just around making sure that, we've got the same sorts of artifacts are being created, like things like, roadmaps, decision registers. There's just a level of consistency across those. But our solution architects spend all their time with the engineering tribe that they are part of, and they feel a very strong affinity to that tribe. So all of them came through. We all but one of our architects was an internal promotion. So it came from people who had a very strong engineering background and particularly quite tenured at our organisation, but have demonstrated a real desire to have like a bit more, if you like, influence and impact at a wider level. So they've taken that on, which meant that they already had the trust and I suppose respect of the engineers there, that it never felt like an ivory tower decision. It was like kind of you're one of us, but now you're helping us just kind of look a bit further on. So that's how we've structured it, and it's working okay for us at the moment.
I'll tell you what I'm setting up at the place that I am, because there's not going to be enough room in the organisation for a specific architect. I'm currently fulfilling a role which is sort of a head of architecture, but I only work 2 days a week. So essentially they've got a part-time head of architect when they're doing a re-platform. And I'm making myself redundant. I'm actively putting stuff in there so that I'm no longer needed and the company doesn't actually need to have me around anymore. So some of the things that I'm putting in place are thinking about what's the vision, where are we going to get to, what does the end state look like, and what's the transition from the current platform that we've got to the new version that we're looking at. What's our tech landscape that we're adopting? Every 3 months, let's review what technologies and techniques that we have. Let's put them on a tech radar. Surprise, surprise, I'm saying tech radar. That looks at the technologies that we want to assess and trial and adopt and hold or retire out of our ecosystem. And then we're looking at the operating model that we have. I'm working with the tech leads. We've got about 3 or 4 tech leads in all from the different teams, who essentially play the dual role of a solutions architect as well as actually tech leading the team. And we're looking at having stand-ups, but just between the tech leads, so we make sure that everyone is across decisions going on between the teams. We, as a group, come together when we need to make some decisions around something. When a new piece of work kicks off, we have a look at what's actually required and spitball ideas together. And we have some putting in place transparent decision tracking. So things like architecture decision records, and Simon was talking about RFCs, so we've implemented like a request for comment, interested party review type thing, so we can start sharing things out through architecture showcases or just emailing it out. And then we're supporting the teams. I'm helping the tech leads understand how to think about, as well as the QAs, how to think about cross-functional requirements, all of the illities that we need to make sure that the system's not going to fall over. Think about security. What security do we have in place? What do we need to do to our platform? And how to manage check debt. And that's all happening with the tech lead function. So they go into their team and do the what's required from the actual project that they're working on, and then they collaborate as a group, like as a quorum of tech leads. And that's the model that we're working towards. I'm there at the moment to help seed that in and bake that process in, as well as give them a little bit of a guiding hand when we actually do some of those really tricky re-platforming steps. But as we were saying, as Davey was saying, that there's a point in time that we actually need someone to wear that specific hat.
So interestingly, from my comments before, that I think we need an architect. We don't actually have designated architects, so that's one of the reasons why I'm quite passionate about the need for them. So to your point though, the role is being fulfilled. I think, and this is the thing, it will be fulfilled regardless of whether you have someone who wears the architect title or not, because it's a function that really is needed to build, any ility software. So the tech leads in our world, they do pretty much exactly what you're talking about, Sarah. So when we need to, we get everyone together and we do this. And part of the reason we don't have defined architects is because the teams have evolved over time, and we've got experienced guys who can actually fill those roles. But I think for them, it's, you know, I don't know, but I think out there in the developer community, it's something to aspire to. So if your organisation has the role of an architect or has the function of an architect, that's something often devs do actually aspire to become. So to fill a gap, basically you fill a gap by not having titled architects, but by having people perform the function. And as the leader of the team, I bring them together and get product owners to bring them together as they need to.
Awesome. Well, it's afternoon tea time. I think there's some votes for the lightning talks to go up, so...
Do you know what? There's 6 talks here, and I reckon we can smash
Squeeze them in?
I reckon we can smash this.
So-
And I don't want to
all right.
one.
So just the lightning talk is just be like...
No, I'm going to have the big ass red timer
Yeah.
with the big
All right.
Yeah,
Excellent.
so we'll go in order. So Christopher, Loren, Chris, Rob, Roger, and then Simon bringing it home with how to stop product managers and engineers from killing each other, which is a lovely way to end a
Thank you very much. Thanks, panellists.